You know, there's something rather curious about the human condition. We spend our entire lives desperately trying to belong somewhere, to someone, to some group or identity or cause. We collect memberships like trophies. We wear our affiliations like armor. We introduce ourselves not by who we are, but by what we belong to. I am a doctor, a mother, a Christian, an American, a Democrat, a vegan, a yoga enthusiast. And yet, the more we try to fit in, the more isolated we become. The more we grasp for belonging, the further we drift from our authentic selves. I want to suggest something that might sound terrifying at first. What if the very thing you've been seeking your whole life, this sense of belonging, is actually the cage that keeps you from experiencing true freedom? What if your desperate need to fit in is precisely what prevents you from finding your real place in the world? Let me tell you about Sarah. She was the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately sense what was expected of her. At the office, she became the efficient professional. At family gatherings, she transformed into the dutiful daughter. With her friends from university, she slipped back into her old party-going persona. She had mastered the art of belonging, of being exactly what each group needed her to be. And she was miserable. Not obviously miserable, mind you. She functioned perfectly well. She had a successful career, a circle of friends, family approval. From the outside, her life looked enviable, but inside, she felt like she was slowly disappearing. Each time she put on one of her masks, a little more of her authentic self seemed to fade away. One day, she found herself sitting in her car after yet another social gathering where she had performed flawlessly, and she couldn't remember a single moment when she had said what she actually thought or felt what she actually wanted to feel. She had become so skilled at reading the room and adjusting herself accordingly that she had completely lost touch with her own inner compass. This is what I call the belonging trap. We become so focused on fitting in that we forget what we're trying to fit. We're like actors who have played their roles so long they've forgotten their real names. We adapt and adjust and modify ourselves until we become a collection of other people's expectations rather than an expression of our own authentic being. Now, most spiritual and psychological traditions will tell you that the solution is to find your true tribe, to seek out people who accept you as you are. But I want to suggest something more radical. What if the solution isn't finding the right group to belong to, but discovering the freedom that comes from not needing to belong anywhere at all? This doesn't mean becoming a hermit or rejecting all human connection. Far from it, it means discovering a way of being in the world that doesn't depend on external validation or group membership for its sense of worth and identity. It means finding a belonging so fundamental that it doesn't require the approval of others. Think about a river for a moment. Does a river belong to any particular landscape? It flows through forests and cities, mountains and plains. It nourishes the plants along its banks without becoming a plant. It reflects the sky without becoming the sky. It belongs everywhere and nowhere. And in this not belonging, it finds its perfect freedom to be exactly what it is, water finding its way to the sea. This is what I call the freedom of not belonging. It's a state of being where you are so comfortable with your own essential nature that you don't need others to validate it. You can move through different groups and situations without losing yourself in them. You can appreciate and connect with others without needing to become them or have them become you. But how do we discover this freedom? How do we break free from the belonging trap that has held us captive for so long? The first step is recognizing just how much energy we spend trying to fit in. Start observing yourself in different social situations. Notice how you adjust your voice, your opinions, even your posture, depending on who you're with. Watch how you monitor others' reactions, constantly calibrating your behavior to maintain their approval. This isn't wrong or bad. We all do it. It's a natural human survival mechanism. But when it becomes our primary way of navigating the world, we lose touch with our authentic selves. We become like chameleons who change colors so often they forget what their natural color is. Sarah's awakening came during a moment of complete honesty. She was at a dinner party, surrounded by people she had known for years, people she considered friends. The conversation turned to a topic she cared deeply about, something she had strong opinions on. But as she listened to the general tone of the group, she realized her views were quite different from the majority. In that moment, she faced a choice. She could stay silent and nod along, maintaining her belonging at the cost of her authenticity. Or she could speak her truth and risk the discomfort of standing apart. For the first time in years, she chose authenticity. She shared her real thoughts, gently but clearly. What happened next surprised her. The world didn't end. Her friends didn't reject her. In fact, the conversation became more interesting, more alive. Others began sharing views they had been holding back. The entire dynamic of the group shifted from polite agreement to genuine dialogue. By risking her belonging, she had actually created more authentic connection. This is one of the great paradoxes of human relationship. When we stop trying so hard to belong, we often find that we connect with others more genuinely. When we're not performing a role, people can actually see us. And when people can see us, real intimacy becomes possible. But not everyone will appreciate your authenticity. Some people are so invested in the game of social masks that they're threatened by anyone who stops playing. Some groups require conformity to function. Some relationships are based on you being who others need you to be, rather than who you actually are. This is where the real courage is required. The courage to let go of relationships and memberships that require you to betray yourself. The willingness to stand alone rather than belong somewhere that diminishes you. This doesn't mean being aggressive or confrontational. It simply means being authentic and allowing the natural consequences of that authenticity to unfold. I remember watching a friend go through this process. David had spent his entire adult life trying to live up to his family's expectations. He had chosen a career that made them proud, married someone they approved of, lived in a way that reflected their values rather than his own. He was the perfect son, the perfect family member, and he was dying inside. When he finally found the courage to live according to his own values, to pursue his own dreams, to be honest about who he really was, his family was devastated. They felt betrayed, abandoned, confused. Why would he throw away everything they had worked so hard to build? Why would he reject their love and guidance? What they couldn't understand is that he wasn't rejecting their love. He was finally learning to love himself. He wasn't abandoning them. He was refusing to abandon himself any longer. The belonging they offered him came at the price of his authentic self, and that price had become too high to pay. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the journey toward authentic freedom. Sometimes, in order to find yourself, you have to disappoint others. Sometimes, in order to be true to your own nature, you have to let go of relationships that were based on false versions of yourself. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It doesn't mean disregarding the feelings of others or acting without compassion. It means recognizing that the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to be genuinely yourself, rather than performing a role that pleases everyone but serves no one. When you stop trying to belong everywhere, you discover that you belong to something much larger and more fundamental than any group or identity. You belong to life itself. You belong to the cosmos. You belong to the vast mystery of existence. This belonging doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. It can't be taken away by rejection or criticism. It's not contingent on your performance or achievements. This is what mystics have called the cosmic belonging. It's the recognition that you are not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. You don't need to earn your place in existence. You don't need to justify your right to be here. You are here, and that alone is enough. When you touch this deeper belonging, your relationship with social belonging changes completely. You can enjoy groups and relationships without being desperate for them. You can participate in communities without losing yourself in them. You can appreciate the warmth of acceptance without being devastated by rejection. You become like a tree that grows wherever its seed happens to fall. It doesn't waste energy wishing it were in a different location or trying to convince the other plants that it belongs in the forest. It simply sends its roots deep into whatever ground it finds itself in and reaches toward the sun. It belongs to itself first, and in doing so, it naturally finds its place in the larger ecosystem. This self-belonging gives you a kind of social freedom that most people never experience. You can be kind without being a people pleaser. You can be supportive without being codependent. You can be loving without being needy. You can connect deeply without losing your boundaries. You can disagree without being disagreeable. But perhaps most importantly, you can be alone without being lonely. Because when you belong to yourself, you carry your home with you wherever you go. You don't need others to complete you or validate you. You're already whole, already worthy, already enough. This doesn't mean you become antisocial or disconnected. In fact, the opposite often happens. When you're comfortable with your own company, you become more interesting company for others. When you don't need others to fill an emptiness inside you, you can appreciate them for who they are, rather than what they can do for you. I think of my grandmother, who in her later years seemed to have discovered this secret. She would sit in her garden, perfectly content in her solitude, but when visitors came, she was fully present with them. She didn't cling to their company or feel abandoned when they left. She enjoyed connection when it came and enjoyed solitude when it returned. She belonged fully to herself, and in doing so, belonged naturally to everyone she encountered. This is the art of not belonging. It's a way of moving through the world with open hands and an open heart, appreciating what comes without grasping it, enjoying companionship without depending on it, loving others without losing yourself in them. When you master this art, you discover that you've been seeking belonging in all the wrong places. You've been looking for it in groups and roles and identities, when all along it was waiting for you in the one place you never thought to look, in your own essential being, in your own authentic nature, in your own fundamental okayness, exactly as you are. The freedom of not belonging anywhere is really the freedom of belonging everywhere. When you don't need to fit in, you fit naturally wherever life places you. When you don't need others' approval, you can give your authentic self as a gift to every situation you encounter. When you stop performing roles, you can play them skillfully when appropriate, but lightly without attachment, without losing yourself in the character. This is true spiritual maturity, not the ability to attract belonging, but the freedom to live without needing it. Not the skill of fitting in, but the courage of standing out when authenticity requires it. Not the security of group membership, but the unshakable confidence that comes from belonging, ultimately to yourself and to existence itself. So perhaps today you might experiment with this freedom. Perhaps you might speak one true thing instead of one pleasing thing. Perhaps you might choose authenticity over acceptance just once, just to see what happens. Perhaps you might discover that the belonging you've been seeking was always available, not out there in others' approval, but right here in your willingness to be genuinely, unapologetically, beautifully yourself. I remember sitting with a woman named Elena, who had spent 43 years of her life being exactly who everyone else needed her to be. She was the perfect daughter who never caused trouble, the ideal student who always followed the rules, the model employee who never questioned authority, the accommodating friend who always said yes. She had collected a lifetime of gold stars for good behavior, and yet she felt completely empty inside. I don't even know who I am anymore, she told me. I've been so many different versions of myself for so many different people that I've lost track of the original. It's like I'm a library book that's been checked out so many times that the pages have worn thin and the story has become illegible. This is the cost of chronic belonging seeking. We become so skilled at adapting ourselves to others' expectations that we lose contact with our own inner nature. We become shapeshifters without a true form, actors without authentic character to return to when the performance ends. Elena's breakthrough came during what she called her breakdown. She was at a family reunion, playing her usual role of the agreeable relative, when someone made a comment that she found deeply offensive. In any other situation, she would have smiled and changed the subject. But something inside her had reached its limit. She found herself speaking up, clearly and calmly, but with complete honesty about how she felt. The room went silent. Her family looked at her as if she had grown a second head. But instead of the catastrophe she had always imagined would follow such honesty, something beautiful happened. Her teenage niece, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up with eyes full of respect and said, "Aunt Elena, I've never heard you say what you really think before. Thank you." That moment changed everything for Elena. She realized that her lifelong pattern of accommodation hadn't just been harming her. It had been depriving others of the gift of knowing who she really was. Her authenticity, when it finally emerged, gave others permission to be authentic too. This is one of the hidden gifts of embracing the freedom of not belonging. When you stop performing for others, you create space for them to stop performing too. When you risk being disliked for who you really are, you offer others the possibility of being loved for who they really are. But let me be clear about something important. The freedom of not belonging doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others or dismissive of social connections. It's not about building walls or becoming coldly self-sufficient. True freedom from the need to belong actually makes genuine belonging possible for the first time. When you're no longer desperate for acceptance, you can choose your connections consciously rather than compulsively. When you're not afraid of rejection, you can be selective about where you invest your energy. When you don't need others to validate your worth, you can appreciate their unique qualities without trying to possess or change them. Think about the difference between a hungry person at a buffet and someone who has eaten well before arriving. The hungry person will grab everything they can, mixing flavors that don't go together, eating past satisfaction because they're afraid the food will disappear. But the person who comes to the buffet already nourished can choose thoughtfully, selecting only what truly appeals to them, savoring each bite. This is how relationships change when you discover the freedom of not belonging. You stop consuming connections out of neediness and start choosing them out of genuine affinity. You stop clinging to people who drain you and start gravitating toward those who nourish you. You stop trying to be all things to all people and start offering your authentic gifts to those who can truly receive them. The paradox is complete. When you stop needing to belong everywhere, you finally discover where you truly belong, not in roles or groups or identities, but in the simple radical act of being yourself in a world that is constantly inviting you to be someone else. This is the deepest belonging of all, the belonging to your own authentic nature, to your own essential truth, to your own unshakable worth. Because in the end, the deepest belonging is not about finding your place in someone else's world. It's about having the courage to inhabit your own.